Podcast. I am your host, Sean Smith. Hey, I'm here to introduce a really awesome interview that I recorded with Tall Tall Trees, the moniker of Mike Savino, an incredible folk banjo multi-instrumentalist, actually, not just a banjo player, but he's best known for the Banjotron, a instrument that he created. But we get into all of that in the episode that is coming, the interview, rather, that is coming up on this episode. I am your host, Sean Smith. I've been here doing this podcast now for a good long time. I've been doing the blog now since 2012, believe it or not. So it's been 12 years of the high note. Can't believe it's been that long, but here I am still doing the damn thing and delivering the good music to y'all. And I'm really happy with this interview with Mike Savino because as I'm recording this, just a few weeks ago, he released his 5th album, Stick to the Mystical Eye. I think this is one of the first times that I've interviewed somebody this close to an album release specifically about the album that they recorded. And I've been a fan of Tall Tall Trees for a long time. I feel like I've heard the Tall Tall Trees name in the folk community for just about as long as I've been involved. And since the album in 2020, which was, what was the name of that one? Called A Wave of Golden Things. Ever since that album, that really got me on board, and coincidentally enough, that was the first album that Mike used the Banjotron, which is an instrument that he created. So this interview is probably one on the longer side, but we really go into kind of track by track the album, and I think it's really awesome to get the artist perspective, and Mike couldn't have been nicer, gave me all of this time. He was at his parents' house in New York, and the audio quality on my end is a little meh because there was a hurricane bearing down on me when we recorded, so my Wi-Fi was a little wonky, but nevertheless it's just a little bit in there. You'll hear it, but apologies in advance. So I really hope that you enjoyed the interview. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the High Note Podcast on whatever platform you're listening to. Go ahead and check me out at highnoteblog.com. That's where you can get all of the blogs every Tuesday and every Friday, the list of every album for New Music Friday. As far as Tall Tall Trees, you can go to talltalltrees.com and see all of the wonderful things there. You can also see Mike as he is performing with Kishibashi on, let's actually go with his dates first because they're sooner. So he is performing with Josiah Wolf, who is the co-writer of Stick to the Mysical Eye, October 11th at Higher Ground in Burlington, Vermont, October 12th at Feedy Lounge in Providence, Rhode Island, October 13th at Stone Church in Newmarket Road, New Hampshire, October 14th at the Drake in Amherst, Massachusetts, October 15th at the Sultan Room in Brooklyn, New York, October 18th at the Pinhook in Raleigh, North Carolina, October 19th at the Poorhouse in Charleston, South Carolina, on the 20th at Evening Music in Charleston, North Carolina. So there's a Charleston, North Carolina. Oh, Charlotte. October 20th at Charlotte, North Carolina. October 20th at the Evening Music in Charlotte, North Carolina. October 21st at Gray Eagle in Asheville, North Carolina. And October 22nd at Vinyl in Atlanta, Georgia. Then in November, you can see Mike on tour with Kishibashi. So November 5th in Seattle, Washington at Omar. Oh man, I can't pronounce that. Song film. So and you can see him on tour with Kishibashi. I'll run through those dates and cities real quick. So, November 5th in Seattle, Washington, the 6th in Portland, the 8th in San Francisco, the 9th in LA, the 12th in Chicago, the 14th in Atlanta, the 18th in Brooklyn, the 19th in Washington, D.C., and the 21st in Boston, Massachusetts. Apologies, I don't have the dates or the names of the venues. They're just not on his website, on Kishibashi's website. So if you go there, if you click on more info, it'll tell you where it is and get tickets and all that stuff. So please enjoy this amazing interview that I recorded with Mike Savino, and please go see Tall Tall Trees the next chance that you get and pick up his album. Stick to the Mystical Eye. Go to his website. There's links there to get it on all your favorite platforms, but get a vinyl edition or get a CD or a cassette, however you kids are listening to music these days. Much love. See you out there. Mike Savino, welcome to the High Note Podcast.
Hey, well, thanks for having me, but I appreciate it.
How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine. I'm sitting outside here in New York, and as you can hear, sirens and all the good stuff. But
The scenic
yeah,
sounds of New York, right?
yeah, indeed, indeed. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The reason that I asked you to come on the podcast was because I absolutely loved your latest album that you just released a couple weeks ago, Stick to the
Thank you.
Mystical Eye.
Yes, thank you for checking it out.
Oh man, it was so good. I've been a fan of yours for a little while, at least for a few years. But I was wondering,
Cool.
for my listeners and for me, if you could take me back a little bit and tell me, kind of give me your musical journey. Where did you grow up and how did you get into music?
Yeah. Oh, that's a very good question. I mean, well, I grew up here in New York, in Long Island, actually, a little town called Smithtown, where I am right now.
Awesome. You
And
gotta shout out Wu Tang every time you mention Long Island, right? I think.
oh yeah, there's a lot of great hip hop that came from Long Island, and that was like kind of part of my first love of music. I had some cousins in Brooklyn, and we would go out to Brooklyn ever so often, the holidays and whatnot. And my cousins were about 10 years older than me, so they would give me these mixtapes that they would make off the radio and stuff. You know, and a lot of music that I grew up on was, yeah, music from Long Island. Things like De La Soul and Run DMC and Beastie Boys and stuff like this, which my impressionable young 9, 10-year-old mind wasn't ready for, but yeah, it's cool. Public Enemy, is another one that's from out here. Yeah, so it's cool, but yeah, I mean, I got into music through the band system. I was fortunate that my school had a band program, and I was playing saxophone back in those days, and it kind of progressed from there. I kind of was into the saxophone, and my band teacher saw that I was into it, and he like kind of pulled me aside one day and asked if I wanted to play the baritone saxophone, which is this huge thing. And I was like, yes, I do. And I
Yeah.
started playing that, which is kind of, there was only one of them in the band, and I felt kind of special about it. And then, when I joined the jazz band, I was sitting next to a kid who was in the higher level jazz band, and he played the baritone, and he also played bass guitar. And that kind of got me thinking, oh, I can play bass guitar, I guess. And then someone gave me a bass guitar and a little amp, and I kind of took off from there. I put the saxophone down pretty much after that, and just playing in rock bands and stuff, which was my beginning, in like eighth grade, ninth grade. I remember, it was pretty cool. Pretty cool. You know, I was into like Iron Maiden and hair metal back in those days.
Oh
Which
yeah.
kind of like in the time when I was in high school, we kind of when I was in ninth grade, it was all about kind of like the hair metal thing, and then Kurt Cobain spun all that stuff on its end, and I just kind of fell in love with this whole grunge world.
Wow.
But those were my high school years, going to see. I was just looking through an album. I had tickets from seeing Pearl Jam, seeing Nirvana. First time I saw Primus, all these like cool things. I was just remembering seeing these concerts, Alice in Chains, Lollapalooza. This was like pretty formative for my young musical world. You know,
Yeah, absolutely. And what were the who were the bass player like? So Primus, Les Claypool, of course, but
yeah,
like, were there some bass
always
players specifically that
really
you were looking at?
yes. I mean, Les Claypool was probably one of the most pivotal uh, guys in those days for me because he was so weird and so I loved his approach to playing music and like that when I heard that it spun me out. I was like, oh, I saw, because I was used to playing. I learned how to play bass. One of my earliest girlfriends older brother was like an Eddie Van Halen head, and I learned how to play bass from him. He would like, we would sit and jam and he would show me what to do for those Van Halen songs, it's pretty easy stuff, that stuff it's just basically, Michael Anthony was a great solid bass player, but it's just simple things, underneath. And I would play those parts and he would play all the cool Eddie Van Halen stuff.
Running
But
with the devil, right?
yeah, and that stuff is just pumping quarter notes the whole time, but it's great, functional.
Oh yeah.
I learned how to play bass, but then when I saw what Les Claypool was doing, I was like, and Flea, those two guys, I was like, I want
Ooh.
to.
Yeah,
So
Flea was
yeah,
amazing.
yeah,
Still
still
is.
is.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, both of those guys are amazing, So yeah, those two guys were like, okay, bass is really fun and you can do some crazy stuff as well. And you probably won't get hired as a professional unless you create around it, but that kind of set me on a my own path where, I was into things that were just left of center, and kind of since then I've been exploring that, how do I stand out? How do I do something unique that hasn't been done before with music? It's a hard thing to do to set yourself aside and find a voice. So but those guys, were the beginning of that for me. And then later in high school, I got into the Grateful Dead and I got into Fish. Those
Ah, wow.
yeah, those two, they kind of took me out of, at the end of the grunge era, I was like, oh, I saw my first Dead show and I was like, oh, okay, this is a whole new world that I wanted to understand. And the improvisational thing is what really took me into that world and like enamored me that these guys can play 3 hours every night and it's not the same, they're really exploring something.
Yeah, and you when you learn that there are a lot of covers of folk and like they throw a lot of bluegrass in there and stuff, and you're like, wait a second, this is a Woody Guthrie song. Like, wait a second, this is you
Oh,
start
yeah.
listening to this stuff, and then it kind of is that how
Yeah.
did you get into folk music?
I mean, I mean, it's really funny. I wasn't really into folk music. I had such a backwards way of getting into American folk music, because listening to the Grateful Dead and listening to Fish like perked my ears up, and I said, oh, I was really trying to figure out what they were doing. Jerry Garcia, is really like a jazz musician. They're exploring and they're soloing within tonalities that I didn't understand at that time. They're out of the rock lexicon. And I was even, through the 80s, I was into Iron Maiden and stuff like that. And like, that's really technical stuff, but it's not improvisatory. There's a method to that madness. When I heard, things like Fish, I was like, there is something going on here that they're exploring that's outside of this normal rock lexicon. And of course, that led me into like all this kind of prog rock and stuff like that. But what it eventually led me to was to study jazz, because I wanted to understand music on a deeper level, and I wanted to understand how to do that, how to like connect my voice to music, and it's not riffs. I was tired of like learning riffs and learning parts and stuff like that. I wanted to get into the language of music, and at that time in like the 90s, Fish was playing jazz covers in their set. They would like go aside and play a bluegrass set with banjo and
Oh
and
wow.
and you know they were it was pretty wild. They were very influential as far as like the possibilities of what you can do with music beyond playing rock and roll. So yeah, I mean that eventually, it took a while, but it eventually led me to go study jazz in a conservatory.
Oh wow. So where did you study?
I went to the New School in New York.
Yeah, the famous new
Yeah.
school.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I was I knew it at the time, but when I look back and it's pretty amazing like to see, so many of my I went to school with Robert Glasper. I
Oh
don't know if you know.
wow.
He was like, one of my first nights in New York, like my buddy, my roommate was friends with Robert, and we all went out. I hadn't, I mean, you don't know who these people are, but you hear, I mean, how talented they are. And I was like, okay, I'm in the right place. I need to like learn how to, those guys were playing jazz since they were, young kids. So it was amazing to be sort of, I was a little older because I went to college first because I was kind of brainwashed into thinking doctor. So I kind of misstepped and went to college for a few years and totally blew it because I just wanted to party and play music and stuff. So, it took me a little while to wake up and be like, okay, music can actually be a career if I put my head to it. So,
That's
but
awesome. Was there a
yeah.
moment that happened when you were like
Oh,
you made the transition when you were like, okay, instead of this being the thing that I do when I get off work, make this
hmm
my full-time job. How did that happen?
I mean, I had an epiphany. I went to a concert. The band was called Schleho. And I went with my friends, and I was watching this band, and they were like maybe like 5, 6 years older than I was, and me and my friends had ingested some psychedelics, and we were having a grand old time listening to this concert, and I just had an epiphany. I was like, I need to go to music school to learn. Those guys had gone to Berkeley, and it showed. They were just like a level above me. There was something. I knew I had the skills and the talent, like the raw talent to do it, but I didn't have like the structure to learn the language. So I had an epiphany. I just quit school and I moved home. My parents, they were upset, but but I ended up moving home to Long Island, and I got two jobs to prove them that I wasn't a lazy bum. And with those two jobs, I bought and I started studying with a bass teacher in Long Island. His name is Sonny Dallas. He used to play for Buddy Rich at Baker, and he
Wow.
was he was this amazing dude. And he taught me how to play jazz. And then after a year, I think I applied to the new school and I got in. But by the time I got to new school, I was like 23 or something like that. So all these 18-year-old kids, they were like just worlds ahead of me, and I was playing catch up. But yeah, for a while, I thought I was going to be like a jazz bass player, which I did for years in New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
did you only play electric? Would you go like full Jaco Pastorius like on everybody or did you
I love Jock Pistorius, and yeah, that was a big part of like what I was doing. But I played upright.
Yeah.
I probably sunk 10,000 hours into playing upright bass. No joke.
Wow.
Which I still do it from time to time, but it's also I yeah, I was really into it, and I still love that stuff. But there was a point where I started traveling. I started kind of getting tired of jazz. in a traditional sense because as improvisatory and open as it is, it also lives within a box, you know?
Yeah, you're pretty much playing the standards for like
Yeah,
75% of your sets, right? When you're out playing live.
play all original jazz shows and stuff like that, but it's still within a confines, of a certain school. You've got your straight ahead, you've got your avant-garde, you've got your free jazz, you've got your, there's styles within it, but it's still within a box. There's still limits to it. And I was, I always was there to push against limits. I didn't want to be restrained. But yeah, there was a time where I really got into, I was just like exploring different kinds of music. And, back in those days, you had to like go to a record shop and just buy random music. I
Yeah.
was like, well, and then like I ended up buying some Brazilian music, and it I fell in love with these few CDs. This guy Chico Buarque and Javan, and Hermeto Pascoal, which people probably don't know this music. And Egberto Gismonti as well. These are like some CDs that I bought at random, and I loved it because it was jazzy and it had like the sophistication of jazz harmony, but you could dance to it. It had like a groove and like, you know, so I got kind of deep into Brazilian music. I started studying with this guy, Sergio Brandao, who's like an amazing Brazilian bass player. And that actually led me to go. I started collaborating with this group in New York that was fusing Brazilian music with with jazz and second line and stuff like that. And I ended up going to Brazil with them to collaborate and make a record. And while I was there, I was playing electric bass, and everybody was like partying in the streets, playing acoustic guitars and drums, and I had my electric bass, and I was like, I can't play it, like nobody can hear. So I was like, I started learning how to play some drums and percussion. And then I was in a music store and I saw this little tiny banjo. They play banjo over there, but it's a small kind of like ukulele banjo called Banjo. And I bought one so I could start to play. And that kind of like set me off on this whole new direction in which, I actually had a five-string banjo in my closet for many, many years that someone had given me in college that I had tinkered with, but never really got too serious about. And after music school, I like opened up the closet and I pulled that thing down, and realized that I understood harmony in a whole new way, after going to music school. And I just started writing songs. I remember like that day I wrote like two or three songs one day, just like so inspired, like something new. Yeah, it was like a very strange left turn because I was a working bass player. It alls I was working, almost every night of the week playing bass. Like over the years, I started writing these banjo songs, and I kind of like I took a total left turn, and people were calling me. There came a definitive point where I was just saying no to bass gigs because I wanted to focus on my music and what eventually became Tall Tall Trees.
Wow. Wow, that's
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah. So yeah, it was an interesting path, but through all those years in New York, I ended up getting involved with so many different, kinds of music, especially in the world. I was playing with like Brazilians, I was playing with some Africans, playing like also like Balkan and Middle Eastern music, which like totally expanded my worldview as far as like what music could be around the world. We didn't have Spotify in those days. It was the very birth of like Napster and stuff like that. So,
Yup.
downloading random ass things, like to learn, because I was a sponge. I still am a sponge as far as it comes to music. Um, but yeah, and the funny part is I got so into that, and my entire iPod was filled with music in different languages. And it became so crazy that I had another epiphany. I was like, I know nothing about American folk music. like I've learning about like Malian folk music and Bulgarian, Romanian, Hungarian folk music, all this kind and like I turned around, I'm like, I don't know anything about the roots of American music. So, you know, like starting to focus my energy on playing banjo, that's where I turned to. I was like, all right, what's going on here? Where does all this come from? And I started, chasing down the Lomax archive, the Harry Smith archive, and that set me off, into American bluegrass and old time music. And it's funny, I came so far around the circle to get right back to home, but it made for an interesting approach. When I think about music, I'm very rhythmically driven because that's all these things that I studied, and were I was into, so a very roundabout way about learning about American folk music. But yeah, it worked.
That's really awesome. It's funny how things do just kind of come all the way back home. You have to.
Mhm.
I think that's a Taoist saying, right? That you have to go far to come back home, or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I don't know the thing, but yeah,
Now, what
yeah.
was what was like the I guess the epiphany that made you say, okay, I need to record an album as Tall Tall Trees. I need to uh put this down and make this a thing.
That's a good question. I think I just started having a bunch of songs, and it was right around the time where like home recording was becoming accessible,
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think I got like an M box, which was like an early, interface for computer and Pro Tools, and it was like accessible, wasn't that expensive, you know. And like, I just started kind of toying around with this. I bought like you know, my own a condenser microphone and M box, and I started kind of experimenting with recording. I had always like wrote music. Before that I was writing on paper and I had a band and I was composing on the piano and scoring it out on paper, and
Wow.
I mean, I still do that sometimes, just to stay in the exercise of it. But I know it sounds so archaic to like, I was just learning how to compose that way.
Well, you're putting your degree to use in multiple ways here.
I mean, I enjoy that. There's like something really cool about sitting at a piano and be like, figuring it out and knowing how to write it down and so other people can read it. And I had a band. This is probably like the early 2000s, 2003, where I had like I was really into this Brazilian music. This guy Hermeto Pascoal, who's like he's kind of he's like the Frank Zappa of Brazil, but he's like a wizard. It's kind of incredible, and he writes this very complex but very unusual music. And I was really obsessed with this, and it's particularly this group that he had in the '60s called Quarteto Novo, which was upright bass, uh, flute, guitar, and percussion. And these guys played this wild stuff. It was very 60s, very groovy, but also very strange. And I started a group modeled after that. And I started composing for that. And that kind of grew into a seven-piece band with Kishibashi was in that group as well,
Oh, cool.
uh, playing violin. And yeah, a bunch of amazing musicians that are still going and crushing it today. But yeah, it was the singing part that I was always afraid of. I was kind of shy about singing, but I ended up like lucking into this apartment in New York where I had a rent stabilized or controlled apartment by myself. And when that happened, I started singing. I started like because I wasn't embarrassed with my roommates or whatever. I just kind of started singing. I had always kind of like sung along to what I was playing because in school I learned that it's very important to connect your voice to your instrument if you don't play a wind instrument because when you sing along with what you play, you use your breath, you use phrasing that's natural. You don't just play notes incessantly and noodle and you want to, and I have the facility to do that and play fast and play, all this kind of fancy stuff. But if it's not connected to a real voice, it's in my opinion, it's not authentic. It needs to be connected to a voice. So I was always
Yeah.
singing along, learning jazz lines and stuff like that. But I wasn't singing songs, but when I started with the banjo and stuff, I started because it's much easier to play banjo and sing than it is to play bass and sing.
Why is that? Just because of it's more melodic, or is it? Yeah. Why is that?
It's difficult to play bass and sing because they're usually working at a counter. Uh,
Oh.
the bass is usually a counter rhythm to the voice, and even like the great bass players that sing, like Paul McCartney or Sting, you'll always hear them playing simply under when they're singing and more complicated when they're in between singing. It's challenging. Sometimes even now, I play bass with Kishibashi sometimes, and I'll play on those records and like I have to like learn my part and my singing part like and work it up to tempo, because they'll be syncopated against each other, which can
Wow.
be, yeah, it could be mess with your mind a little bit.
I'm sure.
Yeah, but yeah, the recording thing just kind of came naturally. I wanted to make a record, and I got this kind of like small gear, and I had a couple friends. The first iteration of Tall Tall Trees was me and two other guys that were in my Brazilian kind of band, and it kind of offshooted into another thing. Well, I was started writing songs and singing rather than playing more instrumental compositions. And that eventually became Tall Tall Trees, which that record, the first record we made, probably starting in 2007 or 8, and that one came 2009, the self-titled record.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Now,
Yeah.
how did the Banjotron 5000 come about? The banjo that you created and electrified.
Yeah. Well, it first got electrified because I had a drummer, I wanted to play with drums, like I said, I was always kind of rhythmically based. I wanted, rhythm and groove to go on. But, banjo is very particular when you like want to amplify it. It feeds back. It's like an open drum. It's a very unusual to amplify. And, in those days I was yeah, there was one band called Megaphon back in those days. Phil Cook and Brad Cook, who were they're kind of amazing musicians, and they had a band called Megaphon back. They were Bon Iver's original band um, back before he became Bon Iver. But Phil Cook was playing banjo in Megaphon, and he got such a good sound out of it. I ended up going to see them, and I pulled him aside and I asked him how he was doing it, and he put a humbucker in his banjo. So I
Oh.
was like, gonna do that, and then that kind of allowed me to like plug in my banjo, and that changed everything because then I started messing with distortion pedals and looping pedals and stuff like that. And because before that I just had a microphone in front of it, which isn't very loud, and you have to stay still and all that stuff. So once I put the humbucker in, that kind of led me on a more experimental journey with the banjo, and from there, you know, after a few years of messing with that, and just constantly experimenting, I we put out our second record with Tall Tall Trees as a band, and I really wanted to tour. I was like, I was like, I saw that that's what needed to happen to like move on to the next level, and we started to tour, but with a four-piece band, it became difficult. Uh, when you first start touring, there's not a lot of money. There's a lot of expenses. You need a place for four people to sleep, and you're sleeping on people's couches and floors. And my band was like New York musicians who were badass. They were not your usual like dudes that worked at like Home Depot on the side or whatever. They were
Sure.
like they were like pros. They were really great musicians, and I loved them. But it was so difficult to tour seriously when everybody's got New York rents to make. And so I started just kind of playing around, playing solo shows with my looper and stuff like that. And at that time I used to bring a floor tom, like a drum
Yep.
to make beats on. So I had a microphone, and I would like make my beats on the floor tom, and then I would like play my songs with these beats and my loops and stuff like that. And then I remember every Monday night gig that I would play 3 hours. I would like made it a challenge that I would improvise and play songs for like 3 hours straight. And
Oh wow.
I went down to that gig one day, and I was unloading, and I realized that I left the floor tom on the street in Harlem.
Oh no.
I know. I was like, oh, what am I gonna do? But I still had the mallet that I was using to make the beats. So I was like, what if I just tap banjo, make the beats with this little mallet, and I started looping it, and like it worked. I was like, oh, okay, pretty cool. And the more confident I get, the harder I felt I could hit it. Which was, you know, very like I was a little timid at first, and then I realized I could hit this thing pretty hard. And then I added like an octave pedal to it, and then I instantly had a bass drum sound, and I was like, all right, I'm on to something here. So I started playing more solo gigs. um you know and then I realized that I could tour like that as like a representative for Tall Tall Trees was my idea. I was like, okay, if I can't afford to bring this band on this little tour, I could just go as a representative, and then when the money's there, I can bring the band.
Totally.
But it just ended up being that people were like, I've got more of a response from an audience when I was solo than I did with a band. I
Interesting.
think, you know, it's yeah, because I think people want to see you push like that, and they want to see, when you play solo, very exposed. You're very fragile. And if you do like looping, which I always use looping for writing and stuff, but when I started performing with it, it's like a high wire act. You're really just like out there, and if you blow it, it's like you blow it, and it's you, and you have to own that, and just keep going. So those 3 hour looping gigs were a great training ground for me to, um, really experiment and put limits of what I could do with a banjo. But so the Banjotron, I remember like this is around the same time, probably around 2012, when Kishibashi was taking off as well. And Kay was an old friend of mine from playing in the band, and he had called me up, and he had sent me his first record that he made. He had the kind of the same experience. He had a band called Jupiter One that he was touring with, like a rock band. And he had a daughter. He just had a kid, and he was like, man, I need to make this my living somehow. The band is just, it's tough. It's like moving a pack of elephants. Where when you start operating on a solo basis, it's like, you're taking the weights off, and you can just kind of run, which, in my case was the same. So Kay asked me what I was doing, and I was like, well, I'm just doing this Tall Tall Trees thing. And he's like, well, why don't you come on tour and open up for me, and then you can be my band. And I was like, okay, let's do that. And this was right around the time where I was like just messing with this drum thing, and I did it with him, and he's like, oh man, you need to develop that. That's something very special. And from then on, it's kind of still developing. It's like I'm still figuring out new ways to do it, and still pushing the boundaries of what it can do.
Yeah, that's it. I love I love that type of ingenuity. I think that it's like super cool. I had when I very first started out writing about music when I was in school in Buffalo, I got to see that one guy perform,
Yeah. Hmm.
and that just blew me away. Well, I wrote about him first, and then I was able to go see the show, and that whole process just completely blew me away about how he created his magic pipe and how he blew smoke into the crowd and everything, and like it just totally blew me away. And
Yeah.
ever since then, anybody who is able to create their own instrument, kind of like making the things suit their needs. It's just totally like made blown kind of just like blown my mind. I'm completely enamored by that whole process. So is it still the same Banjotron that you're working with from the one that you added the humbucker to?
Oh no, there's been several. Uh, you know, I think something like this has been a process of breaking, fixing, and breaking. You know, but now I've gotten to a point where I've figured out how not to break. You know, but I have since I've moved from New York down to North Carolina, and I met a banjo builder. This guy Patrick Heaton, who has a company working with him since probably 2018 on uh, a six string. He built me first six-string banjo, which extends the range of a normal banjo down about a fifth, down to the root G note, which for me as someone who plays solo was pretty essential, because a normal banjo is tuned to open G, but the lowest note on it is D. So it's when you strum it open, the lowest note is not the root note, and that bothered me about the banjo. So he helped me kind of fix this thing, and he's been building me six banjos for years now, um, which has definitely, it took me about 2 years to really learn how to switch over and make it, my thing, but now I feel like the banjo's not complete without it. But yeah, and I'm still working on, actually there another guy in Cincinnati, this guy Chris Novi has a company called Brass Lasagna, and he just built me a cymbal for my band, which I've been dying to do forever, to have a counter cymbal to the drum, and he just made my dreams come true with that. So that was just this year. So I'm still, innovating and trying to, refine and expand on what I can do with one instrument.
That's awesome. Now, did you play that six string banjo on A Wave of Golden Things in 2020?
Yes, that's when I had first kind of gotten it, and I was still figuring out how it worked. Yeah, that was the first album that I used on it. Uh, and I was still, yeah, still figuring out, but how to, incorporate it into what I do. But yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that
that
was
was.
the kind
I really like that album as well. That was, I think, the first album. I think I have heard of you. I had gotten into folk in like 2008, the first time I went to the Philadelphia Folk Festival, and then
oh,
I was
cool.
just kind of hooked. And so I'd always heard of you, and I guess I never really got a chance to listen to you until that album, and then I've really been a fan ever since. And yeah, I love this latest album. I was curious. You wrote this with, was it Josh Wolf? I'm trying to find my notes here as who did you record this album with?
This album was made with my friend Josiah Wolf.
That's who it is. Yes.
Yeah.
Now, had you written with him before, and how did you guys met before, or how did you guys meet up? Excuse me.
Well, we actually met back in my jazz days in New York. Josiah is an amazing drummer that I had met through a college friend. Um, Josiah moved to New York right around the turn of the century, I could say now. But yeah, we both moved to New York around like 99 or so. And an old college friend of mine sent me a message saying that, oh, you have to meet this drummer that's that just moved to New York. He doesn't really know anybody, and you guys should link up and play. And we started. I was playing in like a jazz trio at that time, and we needed a drummer, so we had Josiah come play, and I just loved him instantly. His energy, his playing. I've always been drawn to people that are outside of the box, that aren't afraid to, get crazy, to push over the line. And Josiah was just that. He really, even in his jazz days, like, and he still plays jazz on a pretty regular basis, but he was very experimental and, just he would do things that other people wouldn't do, which is what I was always trying. So, we were playing right around there. I remember our first big gig that we got at a university was on 9/11.
Oh
It was
no.
most money we were ever going to make. I had my bass in my hand. And I was rolling in the door to go get the train, and I got turned on the news. And, I remember that. But yes, right around that time, we were playing a few times a week at different bands together. And, but his brother started this project called Y um, out in Oakland. They had a record label called Anticon, and he started this project called Y that was taking off and like kind of getting some traction. Yoni's an amazing rapper, lyricist, just amazing and creator. And Josiah ended up, yeah, just he ended up leaving New York to move to Oakland to work on Y with his brother. So we hadn't talked for years, but we both kind of had moved from the jazz world into more of the indie rock world. And I rediscovered him because I was really into this band, and I still am into this band called Danielson, the Danielson family. Which I don't know, maybe people don't know about these days. They're still going and they're amazing. Danielson family was from New Jersey. They're kind of like a modern day Christian indie rock band. It's kind of where Sufjan Stevens came from.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Sufjan was one of the original Danielson family. Um, and I had bought this record called Chips, and I was reading through the liner notes as you did about physical CD back in those days. I saw Josiah's name. I was like, oh, Josiah Wolf, that's cool. So I went to go. Then kind of like serendipitously, they were playing at Unitarian Church. You're in Philly,
Okay,
you
yeah.
said? And they were playing in the Unitarian Church. Y and Danielson family playing together. And I went to the show and I reconnected with Josiah, and we've just kind of been friends. I mean, we were always friends, but we kind of reconnected and be like, oh, we're both doing kind of interesting things together, and we've stayed in touch all these years, and I've toured with Y, several times. Which, if people haven't heard of Y with a question mark, is the name of the band. You really dig into their catalog. It's quite extensive and some of my favorite music. But yeah, we started touring together since then. So, when it came time to, collaborate, and I had tried different drummers, and I made a record with a Asheville Wave of Golden Things. I made with an Asheville drummer, Micah Thomas, and you know he's a great drummer. But Josiah and I always had a chemistry. We had the kind of like this unspoken thing. I didn't have to tell him what to do. I didn't have to push him or anything. He just naturally goes to the place where I want. And when it came time to make a record, it was kind of in this post-pandemic time. Why hasn't been touring so much? And I was like, oh, come play with me, and come play with Kishibashi too. I had, me and Kay started touring with him as well. Because I just love the way that he plays, and we just fit very naturally together. So when it came time to make a record, this new Tall Tall Trees record, I mean, he was, first on my list as far as, working together. So
Oh, that's
yeah,
awesome. That's
yeah,
really cool. Did
yeah.
you?
So
Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, just so we just, having a 20-year 23-year relationship with somebody. It's deep. It's deep stuff.
Yeah, that's really special. And
Yeah.
did you have an idea of the songs that you wanted to record, or did you just kind of go in and like let the creative process take over?
Well, I did have a lot of songs. This is like my first. I didn't make any music during. I mean, during the pandemic, I was writing, but most of the time I was building a studio. I built a studio in my basement in Nashville, North Carolina, during the pandemic. Um, because like ever since the mid aughts, I was recording myself, and I've amassed kind of like a rig, like a recording rig and a lot of gear. And to make my last few records, Wave of Gold, 3 days, I kind of had a mobile recording rig that I was fortunate enough to move to some beautiful, idyllic locations. Wave of Golden Things was made on a hemp farm outside of Asheville, North Carolina. 3 days was made in the middle of the Chattahoochee Forest in this kind of like semi-abandoned health retreat.
Oh
I,
wow.
I was just kind of, I don't know, I've been fortunate that people who are like, have allowed me to do this, like come make this record in this beautiful place, but it always entailed me like packing up all my things, packing up my life. I mean, Free Days was made over 8 months. I made it. I lived in this like the middle of the forest with one neighbor a mile away. It was
Wow.
yeah, it was pretty amazing and quite an amazing experience. And Wave of Golden Things was made in about a month at this hemp farm, in the springtime, like while there was baby animals being born every day. It was like
Oh.
up and have my coffee and walk out to the farm and there's new life. Like is that was also very inspiring, but also entailed me like packing up all my things and my life, and like it was great because I could sit and focus on music for a month, or 8 months, in 3 days uh thing. But I really wanted to have a home studio that sounded good and I could record drums, and which is always the problem. So I took the time to finally fix our basement and build a nice sounding room down there that I could record in all the time. So, when with that, now I've got the option to record a lot of music, which I continue to see like a ramp up output from me in the coming years. But yeah, when it came to that, Josiah had some free time on his hands, and you know, I did have songs written, and we recorded some of those, but they were cool. But it was like, it was like in my own, I liked them, but it didn't feel any different. It didn't feel like I felt like I was kind of just running over the same path that I've done before. But being that Josiah's improv, and I loved where we started to really connect on things that I never would have thought of or done outside of those improvisations. So, the new record, is there's a lot of that going on there. In fact, everything is new. There was nothing that we used that I had rewritten. It was all kind of invented, on the spot, which was I'd never done it like that before. And I would at least have an idea or some lyric, something like that. And it came up, like completely spontaneous and exciting, So yeah, we would just kind of like set up, press record, and just go for it, and just start making something up. And then we'd either get to a point where we're like, oh, this is really cool, let's stop and work on this, or we would just stop and be like, that was amazing, let's just work on that already. It's done. This record has more instrumentals on it than I've ever done before,
Yeah.
and those are all straight up improv. And like I ended up like being like, that's cool, I'm gonna put a bass part on it, and that's it, or like, like it was very fresh to me. So I mean, I love working like that because it's easy, there's no like labor. I mean, there's some shaping and stuff, but the raw sculpture was there, So, with Josiah, it just sounds good. He just knows what I want, and he's just his energy is so good, and yeah. So, and the songs that came out were birthed off of these improvisations, and I sat and I, thought about it, and wrote some lyrics, figured out some melodies, and we actually in that time we've got a whole nother record that's pretty much 70% the way done.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, so I'm excited to finally get back at that at the end of this year. And yeah, yeah, it's a total new way to work. And yeah, working with Josiah really opened up my ears to a different way of working and stuff. So yeah, pretty cool.
It's super cool. I love the instrumental tracks. That I definitely got that Fish vibe from them.
Oh
Um,
yeah,
which was really cool. After now hearing that Fish was an influence of yours.
yeah.
I thought they were really really cool and just appropriately placed on the album. What instruments did you play on this record?
I like to work within limitations because I think that it sparks creativity. So I limit myself as far as what to use. On this record, believe it or not, the only things that I used were the banjo through pedals and loops and stuff like that. I used a $50 Casio. I played bass on it, like electric bass, and banjola and drums. And that's it. I
Wow.
kind of love to that palette. There's no guitar. Actually, I've had a rule that there's no guitar on any of my music since 2012. It's all band, even though it probably sounds like guitar to a lot of people. I know that from like, oh, who's playing guitar on this? That's banjo, but there's a few different banjos. I got this fretless, which is on the first track. So let them come. That's the first time I that, which sounds like amazing, like kind of guitar, at this like perfect. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it. There's some percussion and bells and stuff like that, but as far as instruments go, it's this $50 Casio,
Wow.
which I figured out kind of right before I made this record. I figured out how to patch the $50 Casio into my loop preamp so I can loop the Casio at boundary like by million, or at least by 100 because there's hundreds. But so yeah, I mean things like a finger pointing at the moon and stuff. Those instruments, I just literally kind of plugged in my Casio, just like threw something at it, looped it, and I was like, oh, this is it. Let's go with this. It's just like it's so weird, but also it just kind of grows on you.
Totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love the funky sound that you created on So Let Them Come. I thought that was really cool.
yeah.
It's deep, very deep.
It's that kind of comes from right around the same time I I've always loved Moroccan music. I don't know if you know much about Moroccan music. This
No,
now it's like a very spiritually deep music. They've got these kind of trance like grooves. It kind of sends you, into this kind of trance, and I had been kind of digging into that. I bought this Moroccan Sintir off Facebook Market, $75 that some guy got in cash. It was like it was kind of it was not assembled, and you know these instruments are famously made from a goat, a single goat. The string, the body is made from a goat. The strings are goat gut. It's like it's a deep, soulful sound. And this guy I had bought this for $75. And I was like, oh man, I'm stealing it from this guy. But I ended up getting it. I was in touch with a friend who's from Morocco, who's like the premier players of this instrument, and he like guided me how to get it back into shape, put some guitar tuners on it so it's a little more, user friendly. And he sent me some strings and sent me on my way. And I started playing this thing, and it's kind of like the cross between a bass and a banjo. It's like an ancient bass, but I started messing with this thing, and those kind of grooves influence Still Let Them Come. I'm 100% sure. I didn't do it on purpose, but it came through on that kind of like rolling groove that's just like hypnotic, you know. But yeah, that one I was uh, excited about, and the first time I kind of busted out the fretless banjo, to kind of come up with the melody and stuff. So, but yeah, eclectic for one.
Super, super cool. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I get like the Castle in the Sky was another album or another song that I really really liked that had like, it's just catchy. Like it had like a free floating feel, but at the same time it also has like a solid hook where I
yeah,
feel like it's like, this could be, something you hear on the radio. Not that I listen to the radio anymore, but like
yeah. That's actually the absolute first thing that we recorded together.
oh
Like
wow.
I mean, see, yeah, the cool thing about the Banjotron is I can play bass on it. As you know now, I'm a bass player. That's kind of what a majority of my musical life has been, is a bass player. So we were just kind of grooving on that groove, and we played it straight through, chord progression, everything. And then I just kind of wrote that song on top of it, you
Wow.
know, which was really fun. Instantly I was like, oh man, this sounds pretty cool. And we had recorded so much music in a short amount of time that when Josiah kind of packed up and went home, and I was just left to kind of sort with all this stuff, I was like, oh, we've got so much music. It's crazy. And I mean, we didn't use it all. And there was definitely scraps on the editing room floor, but yeah, that one definitely poked out to me, and the song came together so quickly. I didn't really think about it.
Wow,
Um,
that's a lot of great songs. I think do come out in one, not all of them, but a lot of them do come out in one kind of flow, and
yep.
that song flows, man. The other one
Thank,
that I thought that I keep going back to Dust on the Windowsill.
yeah. Thank you.
That song, man. That
Yeah.
it's unlike any other song on the album, and it might be unlike any other song that you've done before. I don't know. I just that song
Yeah.
hit me in a whole different way. How did that come about?
Uh, yeah. Mushrooms.
Yeah. Like all great things, right? That spawn all
Yeah.
great things.
Me and Josiah are also we are psychonauts. We always have been, and it's something that we share together. And yeah, that song was just an afternoon. Like, we had an amazing time on some mushrooms that a friend of ours had given to us, and we had some deep times. Josiah was just coming off. He was just about breaking up with his wife of 10 years. And yeah, the guy who helped build the studio, my neighbor, who was a contractor and a friend, passed away completely, totally out of the blue.
Oh
Had a heart
wow.
issue, went into the hospital, and was dead in a day. And like it was heavy. It was a heavy time that we were together. And yeah, I just remember we were together, and we were in the psychedelic state, and we were just, I mean, we've been friends for 23 years, and just like, we were just, crying together, just having this emotional experience, how cathartic it was for us to be together playing this music, you know, creating a new. I already had this idea that Josiah was going to be part of Tall Tall Trees. I felt like it was the right thing, and if I needed a fresh start, and he needed a fresh start, so we were having this very emotional time. And yeah, that song came right out of that was another one. It was just an afternoon. I wrote the lyrics in an afternoon. We'd kind of get in this role where, like, we'd come up with like a vibe. And that one was, yeah, Josiah likes to take walks. He would go off and take a walk, and I would just write the lyrics. And then by the evening time, we'd have the bones of a song.
That song is a full on vibe, man. And are you singing on that?
Yeah.
That your voice on that is amazing. Like I
Eh?
feel like you adopt a different tone
Yeah.
on it, and it just is like it is a whole it's a whole, and you kind of, at least I got, like, I thought it was like more of like a drivey
Yeah.
psychedelic vibe, but like
Mhm.
I could get a walking psychedelic vibe as well too.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely. I mean, there is some music that's made for driving. I feel like I feel like that a lot with my music. I think I drive a lot, so I like music that like feels good when you're driving with the windows down, and it's just like feels like you're just driving through some back roads. I feel that is where I consume a lot of music. Because I do drive a lot. Being a touring musician, so, those kind of soundtracks, how to soundtrack like driving through the back roads of America, or anywhere really. But yeah, that one, yeah, it was an unusual song that because I didn't force anything, and I just kind of, let myself, you know, do something different. I I got different results,
Yeah.
which I'm psyched about.
Yeah, well, it turned out great, and yeah, I'm really sorry that you had to go through that you both had to go through some tough times.
Yeah, 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 I mean, that's just life. you life, and it goes either way. We're both doing fine. I mean, it's but we just have these little markers in our life where um yeah, it brought us together in a new way. We had never recorded together, even though we've known each other for 23 years. We'd never been on a record together, and we just clicked and made so much music. I'm really excited to share the rest of it. Hopefully maybe sometime late next year or early 2025. But um yeah, it's cool. I mean, there's nothing like old friends, and especially people that you have a deep chemistry with, where there's that unspoken thing where you don't have to say anything. You just do it, and you're both in agreement that this is something. It just validates. As someone that's made a lot of records on his own by himself, you know, it's more difficult, you know, because you have that self-doubt, you know. Whereas with this record, Josiah and I, we would chase something until we were both like, oh, this is something. Let's chase this, and that's what we did. And every one of these songs is like some unique thing that excited us.
Yeah, and it sounds like you can hear that excitement. Like, I feel like Sun Drops is a
Yeah,
song that like is fun and light and exciting. Even,
yeah,
and it's not just the title. I think the best title on the album is Groupon Massage. But I thought Sun Drops was definitely like one that I could hear
yeah.
you guys having fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun. I mean, I don't even. I think I'm gonna have to figure out what patch that was on the Casio that I just kind of played into the loop machine. I just came up with this quick loop, and then we just started playing. It's just, I mean, like everything, like it. There was no work. I mean, there was work involved, but it was later. The creation of it was fun, you know. And after a wave of golden things, which I feel like is a heavy record for me, which is weird because it came out right before the pandemic, 2020. But it was like I was in a heavy place. And this, I feel like I intended to make music that was joy and fun and like something that, would I'd want to see at a show, So yeah, Sun Dropped, Groupon Massage, Groupon Massage was also just an improvisation. Actually, there's a fib in there. Groupon Massage is played on a baritone guitar.
Ah, a baritone guitar. What is that?
It's a guitar that's tuned down a fifth. It's kind of like in between a bass and guitar. My buddy had lent me this uh baritone guitar, and I just kind of tuned it weird and picked it up, and yeah, we and Groupon Massage was just an improvisation
Wow.
that I augmented with banjola and echo, space echoes and stuff like that. But yeah, that may be the only. It's not even a guitar, but might be the only guitar I've used in 10 years. I don't know,
And I guess
but
that's the only downfall of recording live is that you have to on some of these you have to dissect, like you said about the
yeah,
Casio patch. For now,
yeah.
you're embarking on your tour in October, right?
Yeah, yeah. First of hopefully some more touring coming up, but yeah, yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and figure out. We've been kind of getting back into figuring out how to play some of these new songs. We did some touring earlier in the fall and late summer, and yeah, they're fun. They're fun to kind of reinterpret live. I've never been kind of a stickler. One thing I learned from Kishibashi is, your live performance doesn't have to be exactly like the record. It's exciting if you kind of, if they're a little different, you know. Um, I'm looking forward to interpreting because, we don't tour with a bass player. I'd like to eventually maybe, but all the things that we do live are loop based, and there's a lot of improvisation as well. So yeah, I'm looking forward to figuring out how to pull these things off live,
Uh,
which I guess I'm gonna have to figure out pretty quickly. So
yeah, no, it's awesome. Yeah, the tour kicks off October 11th at the Higher Ground in South Burlington, Vermont.
oh yeah, land of the fifth.
And yeah, the closest date for me here in New Jersey is October 15th at Brooklyn, New York. But you're playing in Rhode Island, you're playing in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and then a bunch of dates in North Carolina, kind of near your home base now.
Yeah, we're doing South Carolina. Yeah, kind of north southeast hot points. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's gonna be fun. We're touring with this guy Griffin Williams Sherry from he had a band called The Ghost of Paul Revere, and he's kind of taking off on his own right now.
Oh,
So yeah,
cool.
be really fun. Yeah, it's like a co-bill. So I don't know if we're gonna switch off every night as far as who's playing first and last, but we'll see how it all shakes out.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and
Yeah,
I saw on your Instagram that you got a chance to perform at the Kennedy Center. You were literally wearing your fancy pants.
I
It
was where.
looks like.
Yeah, yeah, we played at the Kennedy Center. Me and Keisha Boshi. Yeah, we played a concert for Hope for the Surgeon General, who is actually a was grow grew up playing Indian classical music, and me and Kay had a lot to chat with him about that because we were both very interested in that style of music as well for a while, and still am obviously. But yeah, it was really cool, man. You just never know where music's gonna take you sometimes. I gotta pinch myself and remember all these good things when I'm like sitting there looking at my Spotify numbers going, why? What do I have to do to get people to listen to my music, it's a weird time for music now. There's all the algorithm, especially when you play. My music is very eclectic. It's not like, oh, this is indie folk pop. Don't fit to that box. And that's kind of a byproduct of attempting to avoid. Early back in the days of Tall Tall Trees, we had a rule in which we aborted something if it was regular. If it was our expression, like, oh no, this it's too regular. We need to up it up. It needs to be irregular. And I mean, it's been a rule ever since the beginning, and I still adhere to that rule. I avoid the regular. And as you can hear in my music, it's just it's unpredictable, and it's not yeah, it avoids convention, maybe to a fault, where it's hard to get on a playlist or something like that because people just don't know where to put it. Not bluegrass, not that very eclectic nature. So yeah, I'm always pinching myself and fortunate when I get to do something like play the Kennedy Center,
That's
for Surgeon General. Yeah.
That's so cool. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I really like about your music is this might sound hokey. I read this thing recently about Kelly Slater, the surfer, and they said that this guy said that he's seen Kelly Slater change the shape of the wave that he's riding just by his sheer willpower and determination. And I feel like that that's the thing about your music that I really like is that like you don't care about the limitations of genres or even the limitations of the instruments that you're playing. Through your willpower and determination, you're going to find a way to make the music fit what you're trying to express. And
Yeah.
and this last album, man, it definitely nailed it.
Thank you, buddy. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. To my probably career detriment, but one day, people will catch up to it and be like, "Oh, this guy was pretty cool," and kind of, you know.
I
But
think
yeah, I had a really fortunate year. I got to make a record also with JD Pinkus of the Butthole Surfers. I don't know if you heard that record, but
no, I didn't.
yeah, that also came this year. I mean, because of I've had the studio, I've been able to record a lot of music. I recorded, yeah, that was one of the first records we made in the studio. JD Pinkus is another psychedelic banjo player, maybe one of the only the world. And I had been aware of him on Instagram. Someone had sent me his music and be like, "Yo, this is like your messed up uncle." And I was like, "You're right. He totally is." And we kind of stayed in touch. And right before the pandemic, he sent me a message on Instagram saying, asking if I still lived in Asheville, to which I replied, yes. And he's like, "Well, I just moved to Asheville from Austin, Texas. Let's hang out and play some banjo." And he sent me his address, and it was 3 minutes up the hill from where I live. So
Wow.
started to play. He was my pandemic buddy. I would go over there and play banjo with him. Um, and we, long story short, we ended up recording this insane psychedelic banjo duo record that came out in June. Which, yeah, so having two records out this year has been, if you want a very strange, eclectic record, I would dig into that one as well. It's called Ponder, and yeah, we worked with this guy Kramer, who is a legendary producer, owner of Shimmy Disc label, which is just had a long storied history of releasing very strange and beautiful obscure music like Daniel Johnston and Low and White Zombie and all this like crazy crazy music. But yeah, there's a whole rabbit hole to fall in there. But
That's so cool. Yeah, Ponder Machine. That's yeah. We'll definitely check that out. That's so cool. It's got you guys holding your banjos over your faces on the cover.
yeah, yeah, taken by Kramer, right in my living room there. And yeah, JD has become a very both of those guys have become very dear friends of mine and co-patriots. You're psychedelic banjo avant-garde music. So
That's awesome. I have one more question about the album that I can't forget is the album cover. How did you pick that artwork, and what was your contribution to it?
well, much like the record, that was a serendipitous thing. The Joyful Noise Recordings, my record label, the artistic director is a good friend of mine. When we started to toy around with art for this record, I knew I wanted it to be something, you know, kind of bold and psychedelic and representative of the music. And he sent me this art named JJ Cromer. He's a Virginia-based artist, who I can't recommend more. I mean, I can't recommend enough to go check out his work, JJ Cromer. But he sent me this work, and I was instantly in love with his work. And JJ sent me like kind of like a handful of things that he thought. I sent him the music, and he kind of sent me a handful of things that he thought might be appropriate. And the one painting that's featured on the cover was like, it just struck me, as far as what it, the it just kind of fit. I had the title of the record already. I was like, okay, all right, here we go. And the problem is it was rectangular, and
Ah,
like, it would just be I just can't crop this guy's work. It's too good. And I was kind of playing around in Photoshop, and I had like a temp um photo that had I had taken in the yard, which is actually, it's the inside cover of the album. But I had this temp photo that I was kind of sending around to the label, being like, "Hey, I wanted to have this kind of vibe, but you know," and like it was in my Photoshop document, and I pulled JJ's painting into the Photoshop document and laid it on top by accident, and I was like, "Oh my God!" Like there was some like serendipitous things lining up, color wise, line wise, and I was like, "This looks like it almost. This looks like it fits. It belongs on the color system." Was the same, and like the way that the tree had flowed into the painting, it just made perfect sense. And I sent it back to the artistic director. He's like, "Whoa!" He's like, "Holy cow, that's pretty incredible." And he just like David Woodruff, the artistic director, just kind of like did a few little kind of touches to kind of tie them together, extending JJ's work into my photo, and that was it. It came together very quick.
it's super cool. It's super cool. I don't know what it reminds me of, but it's
Yeah,
like I like a little bit of Tame Impala. I like a little bit of the one Kamasi Washington harmony of difference thing that he did. Like I just the artwork, just like I keep going back to it, and now that you
yeah,
explain the elements, the photo and the painting together, you
yeah.
can see it, and wow, that is amazing how the lines line up in the two.
Colors. I was like, because I had this kind of photo, but I kind of like I blew it out a little bit more primary colors and stuff. And I had already done that. And then I lit it on top. I just kind of dragged it into the photo document with the idea that I was going to, background that on top of, I mean, the colors were almost exact in the bottom. And there's a few lines that like lined up perfectly. Holy cow. I wanted to, me and Josiah really got into the spirit molecule, the DMT zone. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've experimented in that world, but anybody that's gone into that world, the one they have in common is trying to explain what it looks like and what it feels like. It's very difficult. There's no words for that. Maybe Terrence McKenna and his brother gotten close to describing it, but still, it's beyond words. It's like entering a portal that you feel like you're not supposed to see. And that's what that felt like to me when I saw that cover. I was like, this feels like that world. And then, it was pretty quick decision, when it came to using it for the cover. So
Wow, that's awesome. Great choice. Great
yeah,
choice. And also great work. That's I love when artists do have another passion, and they're creative in other ways. And
yeah,
so not only can you make your own banjo, but
yeah,
you can also very good at graphic design and art.
yeah. Thanks. Well, I mean, it's part of it. It's part of the work for me. It's important to be visually represented in a way that you feel like pairs with your music. I've always felt very artistic about my music, and making music is like painting. It's you don't know exactly when it's done until it's done, and then you're like, okay, it's done. It's hard to know. It's not like building a table or something where it's like, oh, I put my drink on it and it's done. It's very ethereal and mystical. you know?
That's awesome. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
Mike Savino, thank you so much. Was there anything that I didn't ask that I should have asked before I ask you my final three questions that I ask every artist?
Man, I think we're good. I think
Yeah, we talked for a really long time. Thank you so much for your time.
yeah,
You can be quick with these answers, as quick as you'd like to be. But just thank you again for sharing all of your insight about this album, and I can't wait to see you on tour and to hear the next one. To be honest with you.
and I appreciate that. Next one's gonna be a little. It's gonna be even funkier, actually.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that is awesome. So,
Yeah.
so first question is, what was your first album that you either bought or you received as a gift?
There's a few. There is. Let's see. First, I had. I remember because the cassette player that I had, the Fisher Price cassette player, is my parents' house. I had Weird Al in 3D. I had Michael Jackson Off the Wall and Thriller, those two albums. I had a weird Menudo cassette, which my uncle bought strangely in a Spanish language boy band. I had Duran Duran Rio, that album I freaking loved. Um, those are the few that I had for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I mean, and like that hits the time too. Like those were probably like all popular songs or all
Oh yeah.
popular albums, like right around when you got them.
Yep, yeah. I mean, probably 82, 83. I was drawn to music as a kid, like big time. My mom's got pictures of me with the tape player just walking around the house. That was my thing. I was into it right from the start. So yeah, pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And well, so what was the first concert that you ever attended?
Iron Maiden.
Whoa,
I
really?
know. Really freaking cool. Yes, I
Wow.
know.
How old were you?
Seventh grade. So
Nice. Perfect.
yes, it was right around their seventh son of a seventh son tour. I remember because anyone who's seen Iron Maiden, they come out with a gigantic Eddie, like their big mummy skull guy. And yeah, for a 12, I must have been 12. Yeah, for
Yeah.
12 years, me and my neighborhood friends were all in Maiden, and it's mostly because of their genius artwork. Their artwork is like draws you in to this like cool like kind of horror based world. But yeah, Iron Maiden. I saw Iron Maiden and I saw Kiss back in those days. Yeah, those, and then, but the ones that really hit me, like when I saw Nirvana and I saw Primus, like those those shows were like, oh my, music ever. But so cool, man. I don't know.
That's awesome. I didn't. This is a positive music blog and podcast, but I noticed that you didn't name Gene Simmons when you named the great bassist to sing.
I'm not a fan, to be honest. I just kind of yeah, I just kind of went to that because it seemed like a cool. Kiss has never been a thing for me. Uh, I don't know. I those guys are from Long Island as well, to be honest. But
Oh, right, right.
yeah. The thing about Kiss that always bothered me is it seems more of a business than it seems like music, you know. So,
Totally.
you know,
Totally.
my anti-commercial, anti-capitalist, alarms go off and say, "Ah, these guys are just in it for the marketing," you know. But yeah, no disrespect to the boys, Long
Yeah,
Island.
you gotta pay respect to Long Island, but be like, not my cup of tea, right?
Yeah, you know,
We are cut from the same cloth, my friend.
you, I tell you, man, you know.
So last question. What is your favorite soundtrack or score from a movie? And musicals don't count.
Okay. Oh man, that, that's a really tough question. That's a tough question. I mean, okay. Let me think. Soundtracks. Okay, Pulp Fiction was a big one.
Oh, wow, what a good one. Whew.
Yeah,
Ooh,
it-
that's a good one.
Pulp Fiction was like, wow. I own that soundtrack, and like the thing about Tarantino, he's got like such a cool, obscure taste in music, bring you to places that you've never heard these songs, even though they're 30 years old and classic. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as like a composery soundtrack, I don't actually know who did it, but the guy who did American Beauty,
Oh, that's another good one.
you know, that Kevin Spacey movie. I mean,
Yeah, hell yeah, I know that movie.
yeah, it's one of my favorite movies of all time, really, and it sucks because Kevin Spacey seems to be not the best of people,
I know.
uh,
He's
but
played some
yeah,
great roles though.
he really has. I know, I think he tarnished such an awesome legacy, but yeah, that soundtrack, that was like, I remember hearing that. And I was like, oh man, I would love to write for film. I gotta look up who did that one. But, and of course, like all the old spaghetti Western shit. I'm a sucker for that.
Oh, that's
The
so cool.
Morricone stuff. But yeah, Pulp Fiction was like one of the first times I was like, oh man, this soundtrack is amazing. I want all you know, these songs in my iPod or whatever it was at that time. It was before iPods.
That's I did some quick googling and it was Thomas Newman who wrote the soundtrack for American Beauty.
Cool. Yeah, was it? He kind of like sparked like a revolution, I think, in film composition. Like that movie was kind of pivotal, and it had like kind of a very quirky, kind of ethereal, kind of but very distinctive sound to that music. Yeah, but yeah, so many, man, so many good stuff. I hope to do that myself one of these days. That's kind of on my bucket list of things to do.
Wow, that's really awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Mike Savino, thank you. Tall, tall trees. Thank you
Thanks.
for this very, very amazing conversation. Really going deep on the album and your history, and honestly, I couldn't have asked for really. This album hit me just right at the right time, and I absolutely love every minute of it. So, thanks again.
Hey, thanks, Sean. I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, I'll catch you out in the real world there.
I don't think anyone wants to hear about football/soccer.
Oh man, I'm stoked. I'm in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven in El Cajon, California. Man, these are great questions. I think the answers are probably better.